My hope is that these introductory OERs are going to kind of change our approach to literature. They're going to help us move from simply reading and having a response to reading and getting into some analysis of it. I think that is the big key difference between just reading it and actually responding to it in a way that is academic. I've always been a reader. I think I got into reading when I was in third grade, and I read quite a bit, but it was a bunch of garbage. I read like The Ghost of Flight 107 or The Towering Inferno, anything that interested me as a third grader. And it never really stuck with me. I think the first thing that ever really stuck was when I was in high school and I was reading The Mayor of Casterbridge by Thomas Hardy. And I don't know why, but that just hit different. It stuck with me. It resonated. And I don't it didn't have any like ghosts wandering around a plane. There were no people falling out of a flaming building, but it really stuck. And it wasn't until years later when I was an English major and we were reading a lot more and kind of studying literature that I suddenly realized why Hardy's work really resonated. Because we were starting to look at structures, we were looking at characters, thinking about their motivations, putting literature into rhetorical context, thinking about how it fit into the time. And Hardy's novel really opened itself up. It lent itself to that kind of analysis. Unfortunately, The Ghost of Flight 107 doesn't carry that kind of water. So it was just the analysis brought different things, recognized different things that were in the literature. It's kind of like music. I have some appreciation. I'm not going to say I like Eminem, but I appreciate Eminem. And you can get caught up in the beats, you can get caught up in the lyrics, you can get caught up in the silliness of the rhymes or the things that he's talking about. There's a lot of energy in the music itself. I mean, Killshot was pretty good. But I saw a video and they started breaking down how he used rhymes or how he uses beats or how he switches things up or how there's not double entendres but triple entendres and all of these things kind of play into this really tight construct where things can shift so rapidly within this musical landscape and it just takes off. I'm not going to suggest for even a second that Eminem is literature, but I'll probably stop short of saying that Eminem is not. If you think about much of literature that we study today, if you go back to the time in which it was produced, much of it was widely appreciated at the time. And maybe people weren't necessarily breaking it down. If you think about like classical music, people weren't at that time breaking down how the wind instruments were working with the percussion and how it was like evolving into this four act type of music. Right? People appreciated it. They just liked it. We just like Eminem music or don't. We just like the literature that hits us now or don't. But we can appreciate it when we start to think of it in terms of aspects that can be analyzed and kind of broken down. And that's what these OERs are kind of going to hopefully help us get to, giving us the language of understanding how we can start to analyzing it, kind of putting it in perspective of things that we can start to analyze and think about in terms of not just what the art is saying, but what it means. And once we get to what it means, how it's saying it, or what are the ramifications of what it's saying, we get into that second part of it and we start to get into the literary or the critical analysis of it, and that is where we can start to write about it. If we don't have that critical analysis, if we don't have that lens by which we give the vocabulary of how things are working, then we're reduced with, I liked Thomas Hardy novel because it was good. I liked the character in this novel, right? But if we start to think about the structure and how it fit within the time and how it echoed some of the zeitgeist or the spirit of the time, or how the characters become archetypes that start to appear in things today, it starts to become more meaningful. It may be cliche today, but at the time when these things first started, they weren't. They were new. So, um, These are things to consider as we get into these basic ideas of the OER that are being presented. And, of course, um, it starts to permeate into other aspects as we start to think about the TikToks, or we start to think about memes, or we start to think about how information is presented. Then it starts to get us more into a critical analysis of that and how we receive it. So, anyway, let's get into the OERs.